Hey everyone, Dr. Crayhay here. In this Chapter 4 lecture, I'll be discussing the 5 general ethical principles coming from the APA ethical principles and also the 10 specific ethical standards. So the APA, which is the American Psychological Association, so they're our one of the major professional associations in psychology, the other being the Association for Psychological Science. The APA is, of course, responsible for APA formatting, which we are all wrestling with this semester, and you'll probably wrestle with it throughout your undergraduate career. But the APA does more than just that, right? So they also do quite a bit of lobbying work. So their offices are based in Washington, D.C., so they make frequent trips to Capitol Hill to lobby for different things. So sometimes they might be lobbying for more education and training grants so that we can pay people to go through school and become counselors, those kinds of things. Sometimes they'll go to the Hill and lobby for increased psychological research funding. Other times, maybe they will just lobby to have psychology recognized as a STEM discipline. So a science, basically. We want to be considered a science. Our principles are based on research, so they do quite a bit of lobbying. Another thing that they do is this whole ethics issue. So they have an ethics, I'll call them an ethics office, I think is probably the most appropriate way to describe them. And so they will, not only do they release these guidelines, but they'll also review any suspected violations of ethics. And so their 5 general guidelines coming out of the APA very closely resemble the Belmont principles. So we have beneficence and non-malfeasance. So remember again, that's just saying that you need to take precautions to protect your participants from undue harm. Make sure to minimize that harm. We have the principle of justice, which again is the idea of balancing the harm due to people and the greater good that comes from it. So if everyone can benefit from a study, make sure that the harm falls upon all groups of people, not just one group, like what happened in the syphilis study. And then, of course, respect for people's rights and dignity. So you give people informed consent, give them a good idea of what they're getting into, provide special protections for those vulnerable populations, and allow people to opt out if that's what they'd prefer to do. The APA has added 2 more to this list, 2 more ethical principles. So first we have their B, fidelity and responsibility. So this comes up quite a bit. This is probably one of the better known ones. So one thing that I hear some colleagues complaining about often is if a psychologist is your instructor in class, we cannot ethically be your therapist. So I've heard of stories, students, you form a relationship with an instructor, you want to enter into therapy for one issue or another, so naturally you go to this person that you already know, you're already comfortable with. The problem is that that's a dual relationship, so we cannot be both an instructor and a therapist. We have to keep those things separate. Another component of this is that psychologists must avoid sexual relationships with students and clients. So again, getting at that dual relationship. You can be a student, you can be a client, but you cannot be both. So that is fidelity, responsibility. We also have the principle of integrity. So for professors, this is pretty straightforward. So we need to be keeping up on research in the field. We need to be teaching our students the latest and best psychological methods, best therapies. We have a responsibility to provide you with the newest things that are going on in the field so that we give you a good education, and we need to teach you accurately based on the newest available information. For therapists, they need to keep up, again, on empirical research. So everything that they are doing in their client sessions should be backed up by empirical evidence. And I'm talking about research published in the last decade. They should not be using outdated therapeutic techniques. So we have to keep updated in research. So I know some of you have been taking this class kind of begrudgingly. You say, I want to be a therapist. What do I need to know about research? I don't want to do research. Yeah, well, we understand that. But you do need to be able to read the research, understand it, see it for its strengths and its weaknesses, so that then you can apply that into therapeutic settings and provide your clients with the best available care. So in addition to the 5 APA ethical principles that we just discussed, we also have 10 specific APA ethical standards. And so most of these will deal with more applied settings, more like, therapist-client situations, but Standard 8 specifically applies to research, and so we'll be discussing that at length. It includes IRB, which stands for Institutional Review Boards. Basically, a group of people will evaluate your study and decide if it is ethical and should be done. Informed consent, which I mentioned a little bit in the last lecture. Basically, you need to tell participants what's going on and give them an option to leave. Sometimes in research, deception is necessary, so we need to, maybe we lie a little bit or we'll leave something out. As a result of that, we have to go through pretty serious debriefing procedures. Animal research is a whole nother thing that has a separate review board. So I'll talk briefly about that. It is more difficult, I think, to conduct animal research than it is to conduct research with humans. And then, of course, unfortunately, we have to discuss research misconduct. So this can be just, as minor as, maybe not reporting things, maybe tweaking the data a little bit, all the way over to completely fabricating data sets. So we'll discuss these each in more depth coming up. Alright, so institutional review boards. So these boards really came about because of some of those early studies that did not honor participants' rights. They're usually made up of about 5 people, and those 5 people will have specific interests. So I believe one member needs to be a scientist, one will be in the academy, so at the university, but outside of a science interest. Typically, you'll also have a community member of some sort. So often this will be a pastor or other religious leader, though any concerned citizen could volunteer and be placed on an institutional review board. So the basic idea is that you want to have a variety of people with a variety of stakes. So the researcher wants to conduct research, publish, add to knowledge. Community leader wants to, hopefully protect the community, protect the people. And so you need to have all of those diverse viewpoints in the room. So procedures will vary a little bit from university to university, but typically you'll have a standardized IRB form that you have to fill out. You'll describe how many participants you'd like to use. You'll describe all of the materials that you'll use. You'll talk about the procedure that the participants will go through. Let's see what else. You usually have to very explicitly tell what benefits there are, what harms there are. So you really have to give a good, detailed overview of your study so that this board can read your report, they'll go over it, they'll discuss it, and then they can come back and say, you know what, this sounds like a good study, let's go ahead and do it. Or they might say, you're really putting your participants into harmful situations and we don't want you to do that. Before you can even participate in research, you have to go through training. And so this can take one of 2 forms. One, you're familiar with the city training that we completed earlier in the semester. That is the certification that you need to participate in research throughout the entire IU system. So if you've completed that, you are ready to start doing research. So if you'd like to assist a faculty member with research, go to them, bring those certificates, make sure you save them somewhere. We have box cloud storage available to us here at IU. So save that. You can take it to the faculty and say, look, I have this approval. I can conduct research with you. Put me to work. The other commonly used certification is through the National Institutes of Health. So there's an NIH training as well. That's what we used when I was going to school and working down in Texas. So there wasn't a college-specific one. It was more of a national training. Here at IU East, we're transitioning from a model of, we're kind of decentralized, so each regional campus had their own IRB board. We're transitioning right now so that everything goes through Bloomington, I believe. So they will have an institutional review board. You send it to there. Typically, the people on the committee will read it independently, and then they'll come together as a group and discuss any concerns, and then someone will write a reply to the researcher. Typically, they'll ask you to change a few things and then get back to them. So this is an example informed consent form. This is one critically important aspect to a research study. So if you ever complete a research study and it does not include informed consent form at the beginning of the study, honestly, you should probably turn and walk away because it hasn't been approved by the IRB. Informed consent form will tell you the title of the study, the associated investigators. It'll give you a brief summary, just what's going on overall. Risks and benefits, it'll give you information on who to contact if you have any problems. It'll typically tell you participation is voluntary. It might tell you here, if you participate, we'll give you $10, or if they have any kind of incentive. And then you can sign and date. Typically, you will keep one copy. The researchers will keep one copy. That way, if you have any problems, you do have that contact information of who you can contact. There's a bigger copy of this in your textbook in Chapter 4, so I encourage you to at least glance over that so that you get a sense of what those informed consent forms look like. Okay, so deception and debriefing. So deception is where you kind of mislead or sometimes outright lie to participants for one reason or another. This might be, so we've used deception in research before just to keep participants unaware of the overall purpose of the study. So we thought that if we were completely straightforward with them, they would know exactly what we were looking for and they would behave in ways to confirm that result, which of course is not good science, and so we deceived them a little bit to encourage natural responding. Other cases, you might use deception to another case, we've used it to induce stress. So in one study that I feel a little bit guilty about, we had undergraduate students come in to the lab, and we were interested in the effects of stress on what's called working memory. And so we needed to stress these students out, right? And so what we did was we told them, today you'll be making a speech about the body part of yours that we like, or that you like, rather, the least. So it was probably a 5-minute speech about any body part of theirs that they, didn't like very much. We taped these talks. We also told them that we were going to show these talks to other undergraduate students. I think actually we told them that we would show them in the Introduction to Psychology courses, which at that university, it had about 500 people in them. So we're trying to create a high-stress situation where someone has to give a speech on the spot about a body part of theirs that they like the least. And then we told them we were going to show it to 500 undergraduates. Pretty stressful situation, I think. The way that we were deceiving them, we didn't actually show it to the students. We had no need to show it to anyone. Actually, I don't even think that we typically viewed the lectures even, or their little talks. We may have just to do some word coding or something, but we weren't really particularly interested in what they had to say. We were really just wanting to increase their stress. And of course, after the study, you have to go through what's called debriefing. So you'll tell them, by the way, we're not really showing this to people. It's going to stay within the lab. Don't worry about it. No one's going to know your insecurities. We would also typically provide resources, so we would send them to the counseling center on campus just in case they needed it. We'd offer to walk them over if they seem particularly distressed after a study. So you outline the reason that you use deception, clear up the deception, and then offer them resources just in case there are any adverse effects. So I'd argue that deception is not always unethical. In some cases, you're walking a very thin line, but as long as it serves a clear purpose and again isn't causing undue harm, deception can be used for the greater good. So as I mentioned earlier, my impression is that animal research is actually more difficult to complete than some human research is, or actually most human research. One reason for this might be that you do typically euthanize animals after you've done the study, so you have to be very careful, very thoughtful, and incredibly deliberate in your studies with animals. There are very strict federal guidelines. You have a completely different committee. So with human participants, you have the IRB. With animal research, you have these IACUC committees. And so basically, you're concerned with three things when you're working with animals. The first is replacement. So, with technology where it is, oftentimes we might be able to use a computer simulation instead of an actual animal. So you have to explore that avenue. And if you can't use replacement, you're going to have to justify why that is not appropriate. Refinement. So, you really can't just be kind of willy-nilly and do whatever and harm a lot of animals. You have to work to get your methods so precise that you're really you're being careful here. You're doing the least amount of harm possible. And then, of course, reduction. So try not to use as many animals. Pretty straightforward. What is the lowest number of animals that you can work with here to get results? So you want to adopt experimental designs to use the fewest animal subjects possible. And so I just used a new word there. So if you're talking about humans, we're called participants. With animals, it's called subjects. So I don't know, you'll see those used interchangeably sometimes, but I think the kind of current terminology is to use participants for people, so make sure that you do that. So when you're using animals, you always want to try to work with replacement, refinement, and reduction. So you want to minimize the harm done, use alternative models if possible, and then of course use the fewest number of animals possible. I'd also like to point out quickly that the animals that are used in research, it's not like we just go out to the shelter and grab a bunch of animals and then start testing on them. These animals are actually bred to participate in research. So that's done for several different reasons. The main one being that you can make them very genetically similar. So that you can see, there's less variation. You can test specific strains of mice, all sorts of those different things that you can control for to give you cleaner outcomes. So these are, there are companies that do this. You order the animals from it. So it's not like we go next door and take someone's dog. They're from companies, which that may or may not make you feel better about it, but you should know that that's how it's done. All right, so research misconduct. And this takes a couple of different forms. This is definitely my least favorite thing to talk about. I don't like to talk about when things go wrong in the process. So hopefully you know what plagiarism is by now. The gist is that you cannot take someone else's work, their ideas, those kinds of things, and try to present them as your own. That's the entire reason that we use citations. So if you take anything from a different source, you should have a citation for that source. Hopefully your English classes instilled that in you very clearly. If you have any questions about plagiarism, please contact me. We can talk about it. This issue of plagiarism will follow you not only through this class as we're writing our final papers, but through your academic careers and probably into your work careers as well. So plagiarism is something that you have to be very, very careful with. And if you're in doubt, really make sure you're citing people. Another good recommendation is to as you're going through, say you're reading a journal article because you're going to write about it in your literature review, for example. When you're taking your notes, don't copy directly from the paper. Instead, try to rephrase into your own words. And then when you take that and you put it into your final paper, you will probably revise it again. So you'll be 2 steps away from that original material. You still need to cite them. It's still their idea, but you've got to use your own words to summarize what they did and then give them credit for those ideas. By the way, if you're taking my classes, so again, this is Dr. Crahay, work to just eliminate quotes altogether. Really at this level in college, I want you to be using your own words. I want to see that you understand what the other people were saying and can synthesize that in a more understandable way. So, side note there, but that's plagiarism. We also have the issues of data fabrication and data falsification. And so this is where we get into some really upsetting current events. So over the past 5 or so years, a few scientists, psychologists in particular, have been outed as fabricating or just completely falsifying their data. So Diederik Stapel is one of those. So he was a leading expert in social psychology. It turns out he was completely making up data from his studies. So much of what we thought we knew, based on his career of research, we have to just completely throw away. His stuff has made it into textbooks, and so all of those textbooks have to be reviewed. It's just really unfortunate. He said it started with just a little bit of fabrication. So maybe you delete a person and you just find some justification for it, or you change a number here or there, and it really is a slippery slope to where you just straight up start changing your numbers. It could also be the case that when participants come into your lab, you influence them to act in a particular way. So it can take a couple of different forms, but in any case, it is really unfortunate and does quite a bit of damage to psychology as a whole. So we're fighting to be seen as a science. So the general public thinks that we are all a bunch of Freudians that talk about, I don't even need to tell you what Freudians focus on. But the truth of it is, much of psychology has moved past that, and we focus on empiricism, we focus on research, and all of those kinds of things. So when it comes out that our very best researchers have been faking it, it's really unfortunate. So you have to be aware of that, you have to be careful with that, and please, 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 as you're conducting your own research, as you're writing this stuff up, please be ethical. Don't do this. I should speak briefly to why this happens. The system is set up, and by the system I mean the university system, is set up to reward publications. In fact, if you do not publish research, you will not be promoted. In higher education, you probably will not have your contract renewed. sorry, so you won't be hired back for the next year. So part of our job performance, part of our raises, just keeping our job from year to year is publishing articles. It's harder and harder to publish articles as federal funding is decreasing. It's getting more expensive to publish. All of these kinds of things are going on, working against us. So you could see how someone under a lot of pressure to keep their job, to get a raise, a promotion, could start to fudge these numbers just a little bit, and then all of a sudden you're just making up data sets. So it is kind of a systemic problem, but I don't think that justifies what folks like Diederik Stapel did. So just a little caveat there, but please be aware of plagiarism, particularly in your own life, data fabrication, and data falsification.